Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hello everyone. My name is Ala Shahida binti Sabaruddin with my student number is 2021493938. I'm from class AS12118. My lecturer for the subject CHM131 is Madam Intan Nur Eliza Fadlina. So today I'm going to talk about corn ethanol. This is the abstract of the slide that I will use. From this topic, we will discuss about production of corn ethanol, how can we process corn to full ethanol, discussion about advantages and disadvantages of using corn ethanol, the conclusion of corn ethanol, and lastly is my recommendation. So, I will start with the introduction of corn ethanol. Corn can be our food, livestock feed, and for fuel ethanol. As the technologies began to growing rapidly, the corn production has risen a lot. There was so many demand for ethanol production. It has resulted the corn prices increases and has provided incentive for farmers to increase this corn acreage. As ethanol production increases, the supply of ethanol co-products also increases. From this aspect, we can see day by day the corn and ethanol really in needed. Furthermore, recent federal environmental laws have paved the way for greater use of corn in full alcohol production. So, what is corn ethanol? Corn ethanol is corn that will process into a biofuel ethanol. For the findings, I use the methodology. Well, how we can process corn to make ethanol? First of all, we need to milling the corn. Also, to milling the corn can be done in two ways, which is wet milling process and dry green ethanol process. There are 5 steps to make ethanol. First is grinding. Second, cooking and liquefaction. Third, saccharification. Fourth, fermentation. And fifth is distillation. We will start with grinding first. A hammer mill is used to do the grinding for dry grinding corn. The corn will be hammered against the wall. The screen at the bottom will allow particles that are small enough to lift the unit, while the large particle will remain to be hammered until all the material is in the correct size range. The grinding helps to break the tough outer coating of the corn kernel. After the corn is broken down, it will mix or slurry with heated water to form a mash or slurry. Next step is cooking and liquefaction. The cooking stage is called gelatinization. Water interacts with the starch granules in the corn when the temperature is higher than 60 degrees Celsius and forms a viscous suspension. The liquefaction step is partial hydrolysis that lowers the viscosity. It is essentially breaking the longer starch chains into smaller chains. To accomplish liquefaction, the reaction must take place under certain conditions, which is the pH of the mash is maintained in the range of 5.9 until 6.2. And ammonia and sulfuric acid are added to the tank to maintain the pH. About 1/3 of the required type of enzymes amylase can be added to the mash before jet cooking, like 2 until 7 minutes at 105 until 122 degrees Celsius. The jet cooking serves as a sterilization step to avoid bacterial contamination during the fermentation step later on. At this stage, shorter dextrins are produced but are still did not turn into glucose yet. Saccharification. Saccharification is the process of further hydrolysis to glucose monomers. A different enzyme is used called a glucoamylase. It cleaves both the glycosidic bonds from dextrin ends to form glucose. The optimal conditions are different from the previous step and are at a pH of 4.5 and a temperature at 55 until 65 degrees Celsius. There are a wide variety of amylase enzymes available that are derived from bacteria and fungi. Some of the newer developed enzymes allow skipping the liquefaction stage by hydrolyzing starch at low temperature with cooking. There are advantages and disadvantages of saccharification, which is, for advantages is reduced heat or energy, reduced unit operation, which is reducing capital and operating costs, reduced emissions, higher distillers, dry grains with solubles. While the disadvantages is enzymes cost more and contamination risks. So the picture shows the schematic of glucoamylase. Fermentation. The chemical reaction of fermentation is where 1 mole of glucose yields 2 moles of ethanol and 2 moles of carbon dioxide. To cause fermentation to take place, yeast is added. The reaction takes place at 30 until 32 degrees Celsius for 2 until 3 days in a batch process. Supplemental nitrogen is added as ammonium sulfate or urea. A protease can be used to convert proteins to amino acid to act as an additional yeast nutrient. Virginiamycin and penicillin are often used to prevent bacterial contamination. The carbon dioxide produced also lowers pH, which can reduce the contamination rates. Close to 90 until 95% of the glucose is converted to ethanol. It is possible to do saccharification and fermentation in one step. Both glucoamylase and yeast are added together. It is done at a lower temperature than saccharification, which 32 until 35 degrees Celsius, which slows the hydrolysis into glucose. As glucose is formed, it is fermented, which reduces enzyme product inhibition. It lowers initial glucose concentration, lowers contamination risks, lowers energy requirement, and produces higher yield of ethanol. Because our simultaneous saccharification and fermentation is done in one unit, it can improve capital costs and save residence time. Lastly, the last step is distillation. Downstream from the fermenters, the ethanol concentration is 12 until 15% ethanol in water. Distillation is a process to separate components using heat and specially designed towers to keep the liquid flowing downward and the vapor being generated to flow upwards. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius while ethanol boils at 78 degrees Celsius. Although water and ethanol evaporate at a lower temperature than their boiling points, and they both have OH functional groups that are attracted to each other. Ethanol and water molecules are strongly bound to each other and form an azeotrope together. This means that we cannot completely separate ethanol from water. The ethanol fraction will contain about 5% water and 95% ethanol when you get to the end of the distillation process. So, about my discussion, I will discuss about advantages and disadvantages when using corn ethanol. Let's go. First advantages of using corn ethanol is lesser greenhouse gas emissions. Ethanol is able to reduce GHG emissions very effectively by 18% and 29% in every mile traveled by a vehicle with the use of corn-based fuel, then biodegradable. Proponents of corn ethanol posit that the organic makeup of the renewable fuel source makes it highly biodegradable, thus safer for the environment. Third, improved energy balance. The Renewable Fuels Association, which is RFA, conducted an analysis and results came that the net energy balance of corn-based ethanol needed an improvement of 2.6 to 2.8. This recorded a large improvement of the energy balance from 1995 and slight yet positive improvement since 2008. The disadvantages. First is environmental hazards. Critics argue that, contrary to what proponents say that corn ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions, ethanol results to increase carbon emissions of up to 20%. thus making it a significant contributor to global warming. More drivers will consume fuel and burning them. Second, shipping and exportation issues. Opponents of the corn-based ethanol posit that the end product is corrosive and can melt steel. Because of this, it is not possible to ship ethanol using existing pipes. Then, effect on fuel consumption. Critics say that the distance covered by a car or vehicle to reach a certain place or destination is shorter with the use of ethanol. This means that it takes more gallons of ethanol to cover a certain distance as opposed to using petroleum fuel. This makes ethanol not cost-effective at all. So, the conclusion for this topic is ethanol is very important to us because ethanol is a renewable fuel and it has been blended in gasoline. It is helping reduce vehicle emissions, improve air quality, increases our energy independence, lower consumer prices, and provide value-added markets for farmers. Corn ethanol indeed less harmful than unblended gasoline, and ethanol is easier to source since it comes from processed corn. However, I am sure if we ask random people about corn ethanol, they will say, "What is that?" So I think we should make an awareness campaign or video so everyone can see the benefits and disadvantages of using corn ethanol. My recommendation is the authorities need to research more how they can prevent the disadvantages when using corn ethanol so we finally can change from using gasoline or petroleum to ethanol. Then I suggest that the authorities need to confirm about is it good for our environment. Since some people say corn ethanol is good for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but some people say it is not good due to ethanol result will increase carbon emissions and contribute to the global warming. The authorities also need to notify about corn ethanol in social media, advertising it in any billboard. Hence, people will learn what is corn ethanol. So, this is my reference. That is all from me. Thank you very much for listening. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.